In order to escape as much as possible from the heat of the day, they set off at 2 in the morning, with the hope of reaching before noon Calabozo, a small but busy trading town situated in the midst of Llanos. The aspect of the country was still the same. There was no moonlight, but the great masses of nebulae that spotted the southern sky and lightened as they set, a part of the terrestrial horizon. The solemn spectacle of the starry vault seen in its immense expanse. The cool breeze which blew over the plain during the night. The wavering motion of the grass. Wherever it had attained any height, everything recalled to their minds the surface of the ocean. This illusion was deepened when the disk of the sun appearing on the horizon repeated its image by the effects of refraction, and as soon as losing its flattened form, ascended rapidly and straight towards the zenith. In proportion to as the sun rose towards the zenith, and the earth and the strata of the superincumbent air took different temperatures, the phenomenon of the mirage displayed itself in numerous modifications. The little currents of air that swept through the surface of the soil had so variable a temperature that in a drove of wild oxen one part appeared with the legs raised above the surface of the ground, while the other rested on it. A well-informed person assured them that they had seen between Calabozo and Euritisu the image of an animal inverted, without there being any direct image. The A's several times thought they saw on the horizon the figures of tumuli and towers, which had disappeared at intervals, without their being able to discern the real shape of the objects. They were hillocks, perhaps, or small eminences. The plain assumes at sunrise a more animated aspect. The cattle, which had been reposed during the night all along the pools or beneath the clumps of marinitas and ropalas, were now collected in herds, and these solitudes became peopled with horses, mules, and oxen, that lived here free without settled habitations, and disdaining the care and protection of man. They found at Calabozo, in the midst of the Llanos, an electrical machine with large plates, electrophore batteries, and electrometers, an apparatus nearly as complete as the first scientific men in Europe possessed. It was the work of a man who had never seen any instrument, who had no person to consult, and who was acquainted with the phenomena of electricity only by reading the treatise of Dr. Lafond and Franklin's memoirs. Senor Carlos del Pozo, the name of this ingenious man, had begun to make the cylindrical electrical machines by employing large glass jars. After having cut off their necks, it was only a few years before that he had been able to procure, by way of Philadelphia, the plates to construct a plate machine, and to obtain more considerable effects. It is easy to judge what difficulties Senor Pozo had to encounter, since the first works upon electricity had fallen into his hands, and that he had the courage to resolve to procure himself by his own industry all that he had seen described in his books. Till now he had enjoyed only the astonishment and admiration produced by his experiments on persons destitute of all information, and who had never quitted the solitude of Llanos. The abode of Humboldt and Bonpland at Calabozo gave him a satisfaction altogether new. It may be supposed that he set some value on the opinions of two travelers he could compare his apparatus to with those constructed in Europe. Humboldt had brought with him electrometers mounted with straw, pith balls, and gold leaf. Also a small Leyden jar which served for his physiological experiments. Senor del Pozo could not contain his joy on seeing for the first time instruments which he could not have made, yet which appeared to be copied from his own. Humboldt showed him the effect of the contact of heterogeneous metals on the nerves of frogs. The names of Galvani and Volta had not previously been heard in those vast solitudes. Next to the electrical apparatus, nothing at Calabozo excited in the travelers so great an interest as the gymnoti, which were animated electrical apparatuses. Humboldt was impatient from time of his arrival at Cumana to procure electrical eels, which he had been promised them often, but his hopes had always been disappointed. He at first wished to make his experiments in the house he inhabited at Calabozo, but the dread of the shocks caused by the gymnoti was so great and so exaggerated among the common people that during 3 days he could not obtain one, though they were easily enough caught, and he had promised the Indians 2 piastres for every strong and vigorous fish. Impatient at last of waiting, and having obtained very uncertain results from an electric eel which had been brought to him alive, but much enfeebled, Humboldt, accompanied by Bonpland, repaired to the Cano de Barra to make his experiments in the open air at the edge of the water. They set off on the 19th of March at a very early hour for the village of Rastro. Thence they were conducted by the Indians to a stream which in time of drought formed a basin of muddy water, surrounded by fine trees. To catch the gymnoti with nets was considered very difficult on account of the extreme agility of the fish, which buried themselves in the mud. The Indians told them that they would fish with horses. They found it difficult to form an idea of this manner of fishing, but they soon saw their guides return from the savannah, which had been scouring for wild horses and mules. They brought about 30 with them, which they forced to enter the pool. The noise caused by the horses' hooves made the fish issue from the mud and excited them to attack. These yellowish and livid eels, resembling large aquatic serpents, swam on the surface of the water and crowded under the bellies of horses and mules. A contest between animals of so different an organization presented a very striking spectacle. The Indians, provided with harpoons and long, slender reeds, followed the pool closely, and some climbed up the trees, the branches of which extended horizontally over the surface of the water. By their wild cries and the length of the reeds, they prevented the horses from running away and reaching the bank of the pool. The eels, stunned by the noise, defended themselves by repeated discharge of the electric batteries. For a long time they seemed likely to prove victorious. Several horses sank beneath the violence of the invisible strokes which they received on all sides, and stunned by the force and the frequency of the shocks, they disappeared under the water. Others, panting, with mane erect, haggard eyes, expressing anguish and dismay, raised themselves and endeavored to flee from the storm which by they were overtaken. They were driven back by Indians into the middle of the water by a small number but a small number succeeded in eluding the active vigilance of the fishermen. These regained the shore, stumbling at every step, and struggled to themselves on the sand, exhausted with fatigue. and with limbs benumbed by the electric shocks of the Yamoti. In less than 5 minutes, 2 of the horses were drowned, the eels being 5 feet long and pressing themselves against the belly of the horses, made a discharge among the whole extent of their electric organ. They attacked at once the heart, the intestines, and the celiac fold of the abdominal nerves. The horses were probably not killed, but only stunned. They were drowned from the impossibility of rising amid the prolonged struggle between the other horses and the eels. The travelers had little doubt with the fishing that would terminate by killing successfully all the animals engaged, but by degrees the impetuosity of the unequal combat diminished, and the wearied Giunoti dispersed. They required a long rest and abundant nourishment to repair the galvanic forces which they lost. The mules and horses appeared less frightened. Their manes were no longer bristled, and their eyes expressed less dread. The Giunoti approached timidly the edge of the marsh, where they were taken by means of small harpoons fastened to long cords. When the cords were dry, the Indians felt no shock in raising the fish into the air. In a few minutes, Humboldt had 5 large eels at which they were but slightly wounded. Some others were taken by the same means toward evening. The travelers left the town of Calabozo on the 24th, highly satiated with their stay, and experiments they had made on the objects so worthy of the attention of physiologists. As they advanced into the southern part of the Llanos, they found the ground more dusty, more destitute of herbage, and more cracked by the effects of long drought. The palm trees disappeared by degrees. The calmer the air appeared at 8 or 10 feet high, the more they were enveloped in those whirlwinds of dust, caused by the currents of air that swept toward the ground. In the afternoon they found a young Indian girl stretched upon the savanna. They were almost in a state of nudity, and appeared to be about 12 or 13 years of age, exhausted with fatigue and thirst, her eyes, nostrils, and mouth filled with dust. She breathed with a rattling in her throat, and unable to answer their questions, a pitcher overturned and half filled with sand was lying at her side. Happily, one of their mules was laden with water, and they roused the girl from her lethargic state by bathing her face and forcing her to drink a few drops of wine. She was at first alarmed on seeing herself surrounded by so many people, but by degrees she took courage and conversed with their guides. She judged from the position of the sun that she had remained during several hours in the state of lethargy. They could not prevail on her to mount one of their beasts of burden, and she would not return to Iridisu. She had been in service at a neighboring farm, and she had been discharged because of it. At the end of a long sickness, she was less able to work than before. Their menaces and prayers were alike fruitless. Insensible to the suffering, she persisted in her resolution of going to one of the Indian missions near the city of Calabozo. They removed the sand from her pitcher and filled it with water. She resumed her way along with the step before they had remounted their horses, and soon separated from them by a cloud of dust. During the night, they forded the river Uritusu, which abounded with a breed of crocodiles remarkable for their ferocity. They were advised to prevent their dogs from going to drink in the river, for it often happened that the crocodiles of Uritusu came out of the water and pursued dogs upon the shore. They were shown a hut in which the host of Calabozo had witnessed a very extraordinary scene. Sleeping with one of his friends on a bench or couch covered with leather, he was wakened early in the morning with a violent shaking and horrible noise. Clouds of earth were thrown in the middle of the hut. Presently, a young crocodile, 2 or 3 feet long, ensued, from under the bed, darted at a dog which lay on the threshold of the door, and missing him on the in the impropriety of the spring, ran towards the beach to gain the river. On examining the spot where the couch was placed, the cause of this strange adventure was easily discovered. The ground was disturbed to a considerable depth. It was dried mud, which had covered the crocodile in the state of lethargy, or summer sleep, in which the many of the species lie during the absence of the rains in the Llanos. The noise of men and horses, perhaps the smell of dog, had aroused the crocodile. The hut being built at the edge of the pool had inundated during part of the year. The crocodile had no doubt entered at the time of inundation at the savannas by the same opening at which it was seen to go out. On the 25th, they traversed the smooth part of the steppes of Caracas, the Masa de Provence. As far as the eye could reach, not a single object 15 inches high could be discovered. The air was clear and the sky of a very deep blue, but the horizon reflected a livid and yellowish light caused by the quantity of sand suspended in the atmosphere. They met some large herds of cattle, and with them flocks of birds of a black color with an olive shade. They were often seen perched on the back of cows, seeking for gladflies and other insects. Like so many other birds of these desert places, they feared so little the approach of man that children often caught them in their hands. In the valleys of Aragua, where they were common, the travelers now often saw all them perched upon the hammocks on which they were reposing in the open day. On the 27th of March, they arrived at the Villa de San Fernando, the capital of the mission of Capuchins in the province of Varinas.